Anything? This feels like a group podcast or something, right? I'm sure it could turn into that. So I'm trying to think, it feels like we did something last year about this time, right, in the football team room, right?
Yeah.
And then I think after that we announced some of the game day things. So, I got last couple weeks, we probably got a lot of requests for some individual time. So we figured let's just knock it out. So if you did request time, you're in this room. If you didn't request time, then I guess it's an added bonus. So we're trying to give you some content. Obviously summer around here, so a lot of our coaches are out, hopefully getting some family time, some vacation time. Obviously we still have camps, we still have some summer recruiting, but for the most part, this is a time of year where if you don't kind of catch your breath, that last week in June, first week in July, then the windows close pretty quick. Let me just kind of go over a couple things before we open it up. Just from an athletic and business standpoint, we finished 10th in the Directors Cup this year. Last year we finished 8th, this year 10th, and that's without a team winning a national championship that counts towards that standing. Our pistol team won the 6th national championship in a row. Really proud of what they do and the athletes in that program. 10 of our teams finished in the top 8 of their respective sports, 6 conference championships, 3 conference coaches of the year, and then a lot of attention around our women's ice hockey program with the Olympic movement this year. So had a bunch of athletes, current and former athletes, participating in the Olympic Games. Our cheer and dance teams won the national championship. And then Brutus. Brutus is a national champion, right? I mean, everybody should celebrate the state ambassador, Brutus the Buckeye, being a national champion. So really cool about that. We had our best ticket sales revenue year ever on record. We had the second best fundraising year on record. Last year was the best fundraising year. This year's the second best. So back-to-back years of record fundraising for our Buckeye Club and our staff. Best sponsorship year ever. Best licensing revenue year ever. We have the biggest budget that we've ever had in our program history. We're taking all of our data analytics structure and we're putting that under one umbrella. We had 14 or 15 different systems. We're trying to be really smart about our business intelligence area. And so taking our data analytic and consolidating that into one unit, we've done that. We have 5 stadium shows in the shoe this year. I know all of you, especially Tim May, will be at AC/DC on July 15th. Right, Tim?
Yes.
Front and center.
Yeah.
But, again, really proud of what our team does with our stadium shows and all the concerts. And, whether it's Ella Langley at the Schottenstein Center, and she's off the charts right now, we're doing these big stadium shows. We're the best in the industry at pulling these off. Our academic success, 3.4 GPA, 36 of our 36 programs had a 3.0 GPA for this academic year. 20 teams have a perfect APR score. Football 3 years in a row at 1,000. Really proud of academic success. 96% of our athletes that exhausted their eligibility this past year either have a job, they're turning pro in their sport, or they're going to some post-grad school. And I think we had 8 athletes that didn't have anything, and they've all got something in the works, but 96% of our athletes are doing something. Turn pro, have a job, go to grad school. First year of revenue share in our new NIL structure. So really proud of how our staff and our coaches and our partners like Ohio State Sports Properties have adapted. We've leaned all in this new era. So really proud of what we've done from that standpoint. And then we have some leadership transition. Janine Oman is retiring on June 30th. We announced that last summer. Carly Grimshaw will step into her role as one of our senior executive associate athletic directors and senior women's administrator. Carly's a former athlete here, been involved in leadership here a long time, so really excited about Carly and wish Janine all the best. Zen Riggs, who has led our business advancement area, he's retiring the end of September. Kevin Griffin just got the athletic director job at Oregon State, and so that gives us an opportunity to really rethink how we do revenue, how we do business, how we do the entertainment side of our enterprise. So opportunities there to really look at some things moving into the fall. I know you've gotten to know, Chris and Will, and, really proud of Gary and his role in stepping up. And then President Bellanconda. What a great person, his energy, infectious personality. He's really curious. He gets athletics. He's made it one of his priorities, one of his pillars. So really, really excited about President Bellanconda. Alignment's critical. We've talked about that with our board, with our president. So Robbie's really diving in, and he's going to be a great asset to all of our enterprise. And then we had the Jim Tressel recognition. One of the most really coolest things that I've done since I've been here is getting to know Coach Tressel and what he stands for, his leadership, what he's meant to the state, but obviously what he's meant to Ohio State. So excited about that ceremony on September 5th. We can talk about projects. I'm sure you guys will ask about that, but I've made the comment Ohio Stadium's always under construction. That's the case now. It will be next year. It will be in the future. So lots of things happening there. And really, for us, what's next is we're going to really package all the stuff that we've done. We've done a lot of things in the last 18 months. Let's make a list of those things and really tell people what we've done, because some things have been public, some things haven't. And then here's what's next. Woody Hayes Complex, Ice Arena. We need to get our student-athlete academic support services area in one building. Right now they're in two different buildings. The OSU Golf Club clubhouse needs major work. It's time to modernize that building, so working on a project for that. We have some things in the Fawcett Center that we're working on. And then what is next for the stadium? What does the next 75 to 100 years look like for Ohio Stadium? We need to really take our vision and put it into action. Now's the time. All these projects, we've got to get them off the ground. So our goal is before football season starts, we announce sort of a comprehensive package. Here's what we've been doing, here's the things in the works right now, and then here's what's coming. And here's how we'll pay for them, here's the funding mechanism, here's what they may look like in some degree. So that's the goal, is to get all of that off the ground moving forward. I'm sure you guys will talk about college athletics in the landscape. Depending on the hour, there could be something that changes. Check Twitter, and something may pop, right? But let me be very clear about this. Here is the mission in all of this. How do we have a legally defensible model that has structure, that has clarity, and that we know exactly how it operates? That's what we're all after. And at the end of the day, there are several things that will not change no matter what the sort of chaos is. We will go to class, we'll develop young people, and we'll play games. The in-between of all of that, that's right, it's chaotic right now. It's uncertain. The most frustrating thing as a leader is when a coach comes to you and says, hey, can you help me find clarity? Can you help me with this structure? And right now we don't have all the answers, right? That's very frustrating, because our job is to provide answers, provide a roadmap. And so that's what we're after, is a structure that has clarity, that matches a legally defensible model. But play games, go to class, develop young people, that will not change. So that's what we're going to focus on. And then lastly, I'll just hit on this. Really for me, my job here was to leave it better than you found it. Whatever that window looks like, that's a high bar. We know what Gene did here, but that's really what we have to do now. How do we take our vision and turn it into action? We've sort of been triaging the last couple of years, lots of moving parts, right? But it's really time to engage. It's time to communicate. It's really, Coach Day has talked about the legacy book that the football team is reading right now. A lot of us read that book several years ago. And that's really when you're on top, you can't be complacent. When you're on top, you better adapt, right? Leave the jersey better than you found it. So, the things that I think about, how do we really take Ohio State's value and the biggest brand and take it to the next level? I think about things like we have 12 million fans, right? There's a lot of data that shows that we have 12 million fans. If 1% of those people would join the Buckeye Club, what's the math on that? 120,000. Right now we have about 25,000 donors, and that's a great number. But if you think about how do we take the size and scale of Ohio State and maximize it, there really is no ceiling for our program from a engagement, enterprise, value, revenue, all of those things. So that's what we're really going to focus on, is take vision, turn it into action, and really focus on, we have to make sure we're nationally competitive, right? We have to make sure there's some financial sustainable model. We will be the first program that has a $500 million annual operating budget. It's going to happen. It could happen 3 years from now. It could happen 2 years from now, 5 years from now. But we will have a $500 million athletic budget at some point in time very soon. We have that capability, right? So taking the scale of this public trust of the state of Ohio and really taking it to the next level. And then we have to make sure we support student-athlete academic and leadership experience. And then we have to have that institutional alignment that I've talked about. So those are the things that we're focused on. That's sort of those are kind of big picture things. And I'm sure that you guys have all the good questions that you're ready to ask. So with that, whoever wants to start first.
Ross, regarding the new Woody, what's the timetable on that, and where do you expect the location to be at?
Yeah, the location will stay in the same footprint, right? So really what we're looking at is the existing building that is on the north side of the building, right? The offices, the team meeting rooms, the coaches' conference rooms, Coach Day's office, the locker room, the training room. What we want to do is we want to expand the locker room, expand the training room, develop a bigger team meeting room at some place within that structure. Right now, not everyone can fit in the team meeting room when we have a team meeting, right? The individual position rooms are in the same place as the coach's office. So if Tyler Bowen needs to have a private meeting and an offensive lineman wants to watch film, somebody has to leave. So a new office complex, a new weight room would be part of new construction. The rest would be really a total renovation of that building. The location's great, and we don't want to, lose that opportunity of that location. But new construction will be part of it, but then a total renovation. Timeline, we've raised some money on it, but that's why we need some public visibility. We need to get it out in the public. We need to let people know. And then once we have that, we can really map out a time. It's not a short turnaround time. You have to design it. You have to go out to bid. You've got all the approvals. So we're probably still, 18 months or so from breaking ground. But we've got to get the process activated to get the approval started, so then we can really put the design, in place to have the right building. Tim May.
We only get this one.
Yeah.
What part of what's going through Congress right now do you totally agree with? And it's kind of troubling to me when I, followed this, that the Big Ten and the SEC weren't more involved in the actual conversation leading up to what's coming. And what do you want to see come out of it more than anything else? Like you said, any structure is better than no structure, I guess, right?
Yeah.
But do you really want the federal government telling you what to do from a law standpoint? I mean, those are,
Let's
I've
go.
got 14 other questions, but go ahead.
Let's go back to civics class, right?
Yeah.
And talk about this. Look, it's hard to get into the dynamics of sort of the, process and the communication. What I will say is, I know myself and our colleagues, Big Ten, the SEC, we all want this stability to happen. And in our mind, based on everything going on in the court system, the legal system, the threats that come out pretty much every day about when we make a rule, now there's a new lawsuit, you can't govern that way. And I think everyone recognizes that, including, our politicians. They recognize that. So in our mind, we've got to communicate around this bill, and we have. The Big Ten has been, at the table. The SEC's been at the table. But unless you have the antitrust protection codified in a very, very tight window and tight way, and unless you have state law preemption that does not allow state law to continue, then I'm not sure the rest of it has any legal liability protection. So to me, those are the two anchor points that have to be tightened up in some way. So we've expressed that. We'll continue to express that. Because then you can actually make rules around transfer windows, around 5 years of eligibility, around all these other things. But if you don't have the state law preemption and you don't have the antitrust as tight as it can be, the rest of it doesn't matter. So, what's been described, this is a compromise bill, right, between, a Republican senator and a Democratic senator that, oversee this committee that has jurisdiction. And so we're communicating with our delegation, we're communicating with lots of leaders around this. But we've got to start there. And then there's some other things that, need clarification around House case settlement terms and what NIL means in this bill, sports sponsorship. There's all kinds of other, sort of nits and gnats around it. But unless you start with those two things, the rest of it may not have any teeth to survive any sort of legal threat.
And a quick follow, what is your reluctance to enter into the word contracts or making student athletes employees? What is the biggest bugaboo there from your mind?
Because we're a country of 50 states, and there's a court case, legal case from the 1930s that said that employment rights belong to the states, right? And also you have differences between public companies and private companies. So the complication in each state footprint, the fact that the states own those rights around employment matters, it just layers in the complexities. So yes, those are the things we have to talk about that. We have to talk about, is there a structure beside that? Is there a structure that happens maybe within the Big Ten model, where could the Big Ten house, some structure with the athletes, but you also commit to coming to Ohio State? Here's your Ohio State financial package, but then here's a Big Ten structure. Those are the kind of things that we need to continue to talk about, and maybe that's the pathway to get something done. Very complex.
Ross, yesterday, the FBS Oversight Committee talked about 2 off-season practice periods. That we talked to Brian about that. What would that look like here? Is that like a March, April, spring, and a June OTA?
Don't know yet. So that just came out. What we didn't know that it would be. We knew that there's going to be some modification. We didn't know that you'd sort of have these separate windows. Where you're only allowed 5 weeks max during those windows, right? So that's something that coach, Mickey Marotti, they'll have to sit down and map out. Okay, what's best? Do we keep the 5 weeks the same that we've always done, and have a spring game, and then you have 2 weeks, maybe the first couple weeks in June? I mean, right now they can be out there. There's an 8-hour rule. They can be out there on the field doing some instruction. So I think there's a lot to learn in terms of how we can modify the calendar and get the right approach, leading into the season.
But the spring game will not be going away probably, right?
Don't know yet. We'll have to sit down and talk about that. Again, it depends on how do you take the current window that we have now and apply that to a new model. Do we take only 2 weeks in the March and April because we want 5 weeks in May and June? I don't know yet, right? So whatever that looks like, we have to do it. What's better for the players and what's better to prepare the team, and that'll be kind of the anchor. And then we'll decide how do we engage fans, in those activities.
Sticking on football, obviously playoff expansion is such a big talking point this offseason. At spring meetings, Ryan did an interview and he talked about how he felt like for college football and for the Big Ten as a whole, a 2014 playoff, it seemed like it would be healthy for the sport. But kind of raised the question of what does it mean for Ohio State? You don't know exactly. For someone who just cares about Ohio State football and doesn't care about necessarily the good of the sport, why would an Ohio State fan want the 2014 college football playoff?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? It's been a debate that's been very public, that's been out there, Stefan. Here's the thing. It's easy to be selfish, right? Because we could actually go back to the AP BCS polling era, right? And one versus two would have been Indiana and Ohio State, right? That would have been the matchup, the BCS championship, 1 and 2. But I think you also have to evolve. And you have to look at the game, in a holistic way. Some of these calendar things I think will help. But what we're not talking about right now is when should the season end, right? And how do we maximize a better window for high leverage games? We're going to go back, we're going to start the football season in what's called week 0 now. That'll now become week 1. We'll have to, adapt our schedules accordingly. But what does postseason look like, and what should it look like in the modern context? And the other thing I don't think we're asking enough about is, what do the players want? The players I talk to, they want to play in the highest leverage games possible. So how do we create that system? And I think if you look at the calendar, I think if you look at high leverage games, I think if you look at the state of college football, I think that lends itself to an expansion. Again, selfishly for Ohio State, we could go back to 2 or 4, and we'll probably be okay, right, for the most every year. But I think if you look at the evolution of the game, and then if you just look at the financial piece, if we're talking about money in the system and we're talking about more money being allocated to our athletes, you need to drive more revenue, and that means you need more content and you need more games, and those high leverage games will matter. So I think you can't just look at a number, 24 teams. What does that mean? You got to look at the holistic approach, from putting your players in the best position to the economics, to the calendar, to maximizing TV windows. To me, it doesn't make any sense that we're playing a championship game on, January 25th? That's way too late. That's way too late. So how do we finish the season in a better window? So I think it all layers in. Look, nobody complains when there's a 10-2 team and a 9-3 team that play in the Citrus Bowl. Everybody says, "Oh, I can't wait to watch that game." If that game's now a playoff game, think about the magnitude, of the interest. So those are all the things that layer into, our thought process.
Back to their thought.
Ross, I think regarding the Woody, remember when Gene was here, he talked about the space was an issue with the TV room,
Yep.
fit everybody, and it seems like it's been a thing, for a couple of years that's identified as being to expand. Are there challenges in terms of just getting that done, in terms of the time it takes to put 18 more months and create more
Yeah.
flexibility? Are there specific challenges, either fundraising or operationally, to sort of getting that project off?
I think, to me, the biggest thing is we just have to go. It's time to go. We've talked about it. We've sort of been in this triage mode of adapting to NIL, adapting, budgets, adapting to, we added scholarships, making sure that we keep 36 sports. We just need to go. And we've had donors that have stepped up. There have been donors who have committed to that project. But we need to spread that message out to more people. We need to make the, plans public, if you will, the timeline public. So that's, to me, we just have to go. We have to put our foot on base, and we've got to go. So there aren't challenges from the standpoint. I mean, we know what a construction calendar would look like. We know that you most likely have to, if you want to do this as efficiently as possible, you have to move out of the building for most of those areas. So again, how do we stage that? Where do people go in the meantime? What if we're renovating the locker room and we're moving out? What does a temporary locker room look like? So there'll be some short-term sort of pain along the way in logistics, but frankly, for me, it's just time to go. Like, we've got to get this thing off the ground. We've been talking about it long enough, and now's the time.
What's your fundraising bill for right now?
Yeah, the construction cost, I mean, right now we're saying it's about a $125 million project is what's targeted at this point. And that forecasts future cost escalation and things like that. So a $125 million project. We have gifts committed, and then we have proposals in front of people that would get us pretty close to that number. But again, back to, we've got to go and we've got to close, and that's the next step.
Is fundraising more difficult when, now paying for athletes too, but then also trying to do projects? Like, do you find trouble with that?
Well, here's the thing. So even since I've been here at Ohio State, 2+ years, we are on our 3rd iteration of NIL in 2.5 years, right? And so, the first year I was here, and this was happening before I got here, it was, donor-based, give to collectives, right? And then my first full year that I was here, it was sort of a hybrid, right? We had some sponsorship activation. We had money going through collectives that we helped raise, right? It was sort of a hybrid. And then this year, it's been rev share and third-party NIL agreements. And collectives, not as much, right? Donors giving, not as much. They have to be a valid business, right? So in 3 years, so now I really believe that now we have a clear message to our donors to say, this is what NIL is, and now we get back to sort of traditional fundraising. And then we have to expand that donor base. We really do. And our team has a really good plan, a really good roadmap to launch a lot of things separate from our campaign. But that's what we have to, I believe now we finally have the clarity where I can look at a donor and say, these are the priorities. The last couple of years, it's been, well, this is a priority a little bit, and this is a priority a little bit. Now I think we can have a clear pathway.
Yeah, Ross, Allen from Maria Cantwell, pretty critical of the Big Ten and SEC. You've been in those meetings. Is there any fear or concern that the two conferences have overreached? Or is it we need to take care of our own interests, specifically pooling media rights?
Yeah. Yeah, that's, those are some nuances. Again, when all this started, it was a very skinny, what I'll say, a skinny package, a skinny bill, right? Antitrust, state law preemption, again, maybe we codify eligibility, transfer. But again, when you talk about compromise and you need Democrats to support along with, then you start bringing in these other elements. So, look, here's what I would say is the Big Ten and the SEC, we provide the most amount of scholarships, we produce the most amount of revenue, we produce the most amount of NIL engagements. For us here at Ohio State, we carry almost 1,000 athletes. We believe we're doing it the right way. And so we don't believe we should be boxed in any certain way. We should be able to have the flexibility based on our resources to continue to thrive. And so to have oversight of that, we don't feel like we should be boxed in. And so I don't think anyone's overplayed their hand. I think, again, this sort of gets back to process and procedures and who's in the room and things like that. There's been really great dialogue, and there's things that I think we will get in the long run, but getting there and compromising is probably going to come with some things that maybe we don't completely agree with, but we can live with. And I think that's the next stage in this, is it's sort of in a quiet period because of the holiday. Middle of July, there'll be more engagement with our delegation, both locally but nationally. Maybe a bill gets to the floor sometime July, August, with the right kind of modifications. So we're in favor of making this happen, but we also want to be able to make sure that everyone has the legal protection, but also, continued flexibility to operate.
Just as a follow-up, so you think that's not beneficial to
I think what does that mean? What's the purpose, of that, right? And we have current contracts. Fox owns our TV rights till 2036. And so I believe based on an amendment last week, there was language inserted that current contracts cannot be disrupted. So even if, let's just say that would pass, how long is it going to take to have that even happen? And then if it's voluntary, truly voluntary, are we going to be forced into it through a lawsuit or something like that? All of that has to be structured in a way where, again, we have the most amount of flexibility to operate like we see fit, which is what we have now.
So, if you were somehow forced into a world of pooled media rights, would Ohio State lose money in that overall?
You know what, Doug, there's a lot of, I would call it speculation on what value really is in the marketplace. I don't think anybody's been able to do a true analysis to say, this is what the TV packages are really worth, right? And if you talk to the TV executives, they will tell you there's not a lot of new money in the system, right? And so I think there's a lot of speculation out there about value and what it means. Look, I know the viewership around Ohio State. I know our brand value. I know the data that I just gave you. right? I know what our value is worth. So to say, would we lose money, would we make more, I have no idea how that would work. I do know that we do have a TV window that opens up around the CBS and NBC window that expires in 2030. Again, it's part of Fox. So actually, we'll have some really good data to say, what is the market going to yield when those contracts come up for renegotiation or go out to market? We'll have some data around that. And I do believe there's an upside, but I also know that the Big Ten is driving all that value, and if you bring others along with you, does it water it down? We don't know the answer to that because no one has really tested that. And this theory around pooling media rights has caught on, but nobody really has a true roadmap of, one, how it would work, who would organize it, and then what's the value. Those details have not been flushed out.
And the idea, like the Super League idea has been floated in various ways for lots of years, right? And so like the Big Ten and SEC has said, we don't want that. That's not the plan. But yet, if we get to a point where there's legislation passed, maybe over the Big Ten and the SEC saying like, we don't actually want this, but everybody else does. If there's something that Ohio State and the Big Ten and the SEC don't like, will you go along with it? Or will you say, well, no, we're not doing that, and now you forced us into a Super League?
Yeah. I think it depends on what does that mean. What does go along with what, right? Is there other things, again, that we could live with? And let's just say, we're talking about a federal bill, I'm assuming. Let's just say there are things in there that, okay, if we get this, we're okay with this. Those things have to be presented at some point in time. And that's kind of the next steps, in the process. A Super League can go both ways, right? If they could restrict us from expanding, but what if other leagues would fall apart for some reason? Or what if some program emerges and they're ready to take a leap and move up, which has happened in the last, 5 to 8 years, right? Well, those programs are now restricted from moving up. So this whole, again, the construct of the language right now can go both ways. So I do think that's one of the things that I think we'll see changed in the language. What does a Super League mean? Is there a definition of it? I haven't seen one. Is that 18 teams? Is that, I think Commissioner Sankey said that they're a Super League already. And they don't want the SEC network to have Ohio State on it, right? That's their network. So that term got thrown out there when people were talking about all FBS teams, all of the Power Autonomy 4 conferences. But I haven't seen a definition of this is what a Super League means, and here's how it functions. Nobody's presented that. And I've seen every proposal from every private equity firm, every third party, every consultant. I've seen it all. But nobody can really describe what it is.
And I guess more generically, with what Ohio State is in the landscape, what this athletic department is, what this football program is there something that could happen with federal legislation that, and you've talked about compromise, we understand compromise, right?
Yeah.
But that there's something in Congress that makes Ohio State do something it does not want to do, or be part of something it does not want to be part of, and there's nothing you can do? Or if it got to that point, could Ohio State say, we're not doing that, and we're doing our own thing, and you forced us into it, and here we go?
Potentially. Again, I think that's where this is so fluid right now, and everything is part of the conversation, right? And that's where we have to be really aligned with our Big Ten colleagues. We have to be aligned with our institutional leadership. We will always have to do what's best for Ohio State. That's the mandate. That's our job every single day. We wake up every day thinking about that. What is best for Ohio State? But then how does that layer into partnership? How does that layer into the national? Look, we need the Big Ten to be healthy, right? We do. We need the Big Ten to be healthy, knowing that we're really at the forefront of that. But we need a viable conference that we can rely on. But if we're forced to do something else, and you got to make decisions, then you have to make those decisions, whatever that might be.
Quick follow-up, could you see the Big Ten moving quickly to possibly get to 20 teams before something comes down?
I saw some articles floating around last night that there's some outreach that people are doing. Other programs are saying, should we try to get ahead of this bill? You know, I don't, look, if there's
You
ever,
heard that.
if there's ever expansion, it has to be meaningful. There's got to be a purpose. It's got to drive either a scheduling piece to it, and then it has to drive revenue. You know, I think one of the things that will be a challenge coming up in the next, I'd say, 1 to 5 years is the West Coast teams in the Big Ten continuing to travel east, and then our teams continuing to travel west. Is that viable and sustainable? Should we be more regional based in our scheduling? It doesn't mean we can still have the Big Ten, but maybe you have more regional scheduling within the Big Ten. So to me, it has to be real strategic from that standpoint.
How do you even project what media rights will look like in 20, 30, 40 years? And how accurate do you think the numbers are right now for what it might be in 2030 when you see it?
Yeah, you know, I mean, right now we have the biggest package, right, in college sports. You know, I think there's some really good data on what maybe the early window, that 2030 window, can look like. That process has not started. Fox is our partner in that, so they'll be at the forefront of leading those conversations. Look, the media changes every year. There's new technology, right? And you know what we haven't really seen in a broad way is the Amazon Prime, the Netflix, the Apple. They've done it in, you know, bits and chunks, but have they bought an entire league yet? Right? So those are the kind of things that in the next 10 years, who knows what it'll look like? Who knows how we're going to consume the content piece? There may be a chip in our ear that has a screen in front of us, and we're walking around and we're watching the World Cup while we're walking down the street, like in a virtual, like we have no idea. Or we're flying in a, you know, hella taxi, watching the world, like we have no idea what technology is going to do. So, but I think the point of that is it gives us opportunity, you know, to expand. It's so early and so far away that things are going to change and evolve.
From two different things here. One, we kind of knocked out last year, the revenue share, who was getting what, just for the sake of knowing, what's the number this year, and has anything changed, not in terms of like maybe who's getting the money, but who's getting what amount of money?
Yeah, so we have 4 sports that are getting the institutional revenue share allocation. That number goes up to $21.3 million this year. Football, basketball, women's basketball, and volleyball are the 4 sports that we are allocating. The percentages of those sports didn't really change, but because the number went up. The other thing that came off of the equation is the first year of the settlement terms. Any new scholarships that we added had to count against the cap of $2.5 million, had to count against the 20.5. So we really only had $18 million of cash last year to distribute. This year we'll have the full $21.3 million. But obviously, look, football's getting the lion's share of that, and then men's and women's basketball and then volleyball are getting their share. So.
And then I know this has kind of resolved itself within the last
Yep.
2.5 weeks here, but the Sorsby stuff did happen, and there were
Yeah.
teams who were actively, at least reportedly, thinking about not scheduling Texas Tech in any sport whatsoever. Did you have conversations with the Big Ten about that, and was Ohio State prepared to not schedule Texas Tech in any sport?
Yeah, it was fascinating timing because we had our athletic director convention out in Las Vegas, of all places. Exactly, how ironic. You know, we used to, the very first athletic director convention I went to was in 1997 in Las Vegas, and then we couldn't go there for all this time, and now the only place that can handle it is either Orlando or Las Vegas because there's 7,000 people there now. So this all came out on that Monday. The Big Ten we never had any conversations as a group to talk about not scheduling, you know, Texas Tech in any way. I think we have some tournament games against them. I don't think we don't have any home and home, you know, setups with them. So for us, it really wasn't an issue. We didn't even talk about it.
Ross, in the rev share, feedback off that one, but from a resources and financial support standpoint, where does your men's basketball program stand, you know, compared to other Big Ten schools, and what more support do you think they need to make sure that they're on an understanding with other teams if you feel they're not ready?
Yeah. No, I think Coach Diebler's done a great job of putting together the right coaching staff, which then leads to the right roster, building and development. Look, by all accounts, I mean, we're sitting here on June 25th. We should be a lot better next year. I think the pieces that were added, the pieces that were retained with our players, that was a big part of it, is retain the right guys. Obviously, signing somebody like Anthony Thompson was a big deal. That hasn't happened around here in a while. So I think Jake's done a great job. And so if we've done a great job there, that means the resources are there to compete, at a high level. And so we believe in that. Jake has done a good job of cultivating that as well. We put more resources from the department perspective because the formula sort of changed around the rev share. There's more cash from the institution side in the rev share bucket for basketball. So nobody really knows what the numbers are. They're reported out there, and we can read social media just like all of you to say, well, this is their. You don't really know. But I do believe that we are in a competitive spot based on this, this past offseason.
You did mention facilities a little bit ago, and when you golf course and things like that. I know you put out a survey asking people for input on the shot.
Mm-hmm.
What early feedback are you getting on that? When can golf feature that building?
Yeah, it's interesting. The Schottenstein Center was built, as a multi-purpose campus, venue. And I guess we're almost coming up on 30 years of that building. And it's served a great purpose. But for basketball, how do we make it, the right environment where it's a home court advantage? I think if we're in that 12 to 16,000 attendance per game, I think it can be the right atmosphere. And I think that can be. And then every now and then maybe it does, sell out. But if we have most of the upper bowl filled, it's a great atmosphere. And then the lower bowl is filled. So the survey has really been, how do we adapt experiential seating? How do we adapt? Is there premium seating? How do we make the bowl a little more intimate? Is there things we can do around the seating bowl? We are upgrading. There's a new roof. There's air conditioning. There's new LED ribbon boards, there's new video boards. All of those things are happening in the shot this year so that people will notice that when they walk in there. Can you ever shrink it down where it's more intimate? Probably not. But, we changed the lighting last year. We changed some other things that we're doing around, how we use the lights and the music. We're going to continue to really hone in on those kind of things. But the building's the building. And it serves a great purpose outside of basketball. So we have to maintain that piece of it while also making sure that if we do some construction, what does that mean? And how do we make, the fans have a more intimate experience? That's really what that survey, I think, will tell us when we get all the data.
Ross, kind of go back to the video, but you mentioned that the team would have to move out of there and you guys are doing some of the construction.
Yep.
Have you guys talked about what that looks like? There's a lot of people.
Yes.
Who don't want to put things in like a closet somewhere, and how does that financially add into the $125 million?
Yeah, we have people in closets now, so we got to get them out of there. That's the problem, right? Yeah, no, we have a plan. I mean, look, there's you guys see a lot of these modular things. I mean, you can walk in a room and this building is amazing on the inside, and maybe it's modular on the outside. So we also have a lot of space in the faucet center that we can utilize. So between the faucet, between some temporary, those are the kind of things that would be mapped out. If we have, when we will have to vacate that building if we want to build it in the most efficient, fastest way possible. And so we'll have a good plan. We'll have a good plan around that, and that's built into the cost. All of that's built into that $125 million cost.
But
Yeah.
that wouldn't impact the practice field, the indoor field, or would it?
No, it would not. Correct. Yeah, we would still maintain. Now, maybe we have to place part of those buildings, on half of the practice field, something like that. So those details are being mapped out right now. Yeah.
And for Russia, obviously the percentages have changed. How do you guys go about year to year deciding, like obviously you're playing football, you're paying both basketball, you're paying volleyball game, but how do you go year to year decide, okay, this is the fourth sport you want to pay, or is it just going to be volleyball forever?
Yeah, we leaned into that from the very beginning. Volleyball, I think has a chance to be really good around here. And Jen has done, I think, a really good job of building that roster. We need to get back on track. I mean, we were in the Elite Eight not that long ago. So we think volleyball, from a viewership standpoint, from an attendance standpoint, volleyball is really in that third and fourth spot, especially in the Big Ten. So, and again, then you looked at sort of a Title IX piece of it, right? How do we balance, male-female distribution? So that was all part of the equation. So I don't anticipate any changes in the four. The key is that third-party NIL environment that all of us are all chasing and trying to grow and build, and that's how you remain competitive as possible.
Yeah, this falls under kind of the future of the game, the good of the game question, but reports come out, Rutgers has lost $500 million since joining the Big Ten. Louisville's lost over $10 million on athletics 3 years in a row, and I know that's not your problem, you're Ohio State, but for the good of the game, I mean, if there's no way to rein in what the athletes make, it doesn't feel like you're ever going to be able to do that. And maybe I'm off, I don't know, but if you're spending $15 million on basketball, $40 million to build a football team, places like Louisville and Rutgers are not going to be able to sustain that over a 10-year period. It just doesn't feel right. So are we ultimately going to get to the point where only the top 8 or 10 teams in the Big Ten, the top 8 or 10 teams in the SEC are going to be able to spend that 15 to 40 or escalate beyond that level to compete for championships? Is that good for the game? Do you see what I'm saying? Do you see
Oh, yeah.
the potential
Yeah,
of what I'm saying?
yeah. I think I don't know if I can predict that, right? Because no one has that sort of crystal ball. I think this is the challenge in the entire enterprise, and I'll just take FBS, right? And I was at Western Kentucky for 2 years, and it was very, very important that we called ourselves a BCS program, right? Because the Sun Belt, we were in the Sun Belt at that time, had access to go to the BCS, even though we knew deep down with a $21 million budget that was going to be really hard. And it was the first year of FBS football for Western Kentucky, my first year as the athletic director. But it was very, very important that we said, we're a BCS program. So the problem with our entire enterprise is it's all about attachment, it's about brand association, it's about being sort of, in the club, if you will. We've got to be in the A4. We've got to be in the FBS. We've got to be a CFP team. We've got to be a BCS team, right? What's hard in our industry is here's our resources, and here's where we should aspire to. That's the crux of the whole thing of what you just talked about, is our resource allocation is this, but we want to belong to this, and can we match that? And that's leading to institutions. So then it comes down to, is the institution prepared to say that athletics is a strategic enterprise of the institution? Therefore, we will make a strategic investment in that enterprise. Just like they do, there's academic units that do not, quote unquote, make money, but the institution makes a strategic investment. So you're actually starting to see Virginia Tech is allocating dollars from the institution. I think Arkansas announced an allocation. Our friends up north received an allocation from the institution, for their budget. You're starting, Rutgers, you mentioned them, but that's really, to kind of philosophically break down your question, Steve, that's the challenge, is here's our economics, here's what we aspire to. When those things don't match, somebody's got to fill that gap. So I don't know what the answer, the two things I know will kind of get us to a place is how do we develop cost certainty, I don't want to say cost containment, cost certainty, and if the numbers go up every year, at least you know what they are. But when you don't know where the market's going to go, you don't have certainty. Cost certainty and drive more revenue. That's the chase. Certainty and drive revenue. That's what we all have to to move forward on. It's a great question.
You talked about the stadium always being under construction, and certainly the idea of adding additional revenue anyways. What role would selling the naming rights to that stadium play and all that? I guess how, is that a inevitable reality? Is that eventually?
You know, I made the comment, I think I got in a little trouble, I can't remember what interview it was when I first got here, that, hey, everything's sort of on the table. You know, and that's probably still the case. Obviously, look, we've done the Safe Light Field. We're in conversations, you know, around a jersey patch. You know, what does that look like? Hopefully we can get something done before the season. You know, I think the stadium naming rights, look, it's owned by the state of Ohio. Right, so I think there's a very careful analysis that would have to take place. If you pursue that, who's the partner? What does that look like? You know, other places have protected names with other donations or other commitments where they protected the name of the stadium. Is it something like that? Part of this next iteration is we really need a comprehensive plan on what does the next 50, 75, 100 years look like. Infrastructure, mechanical, electrical, restrooms, toilets, concessions, premium seating, experiential. So those are the things that we're studying right now. And then you have to map out a funding plan, right? A funding plan. Given the scope of our program, I think we can have a really successful process. You know, is there other partners that could help you with that? Absolutely. We'll talk about that. But naming rights we would not lead with naming rights.
Well, we got time for a couple of
Okay.
Bill Landis and then Bill Revelle.
Ideally, in your mind, what would the revenue sharing have to be? Or would it be?
Remember what I said last year? Numbers lead to narratives. You know, here's again, this is it's all layered and complex, right? So the federal bill, has certain things that they actually took away the ability to have third-party NIL because it would count against the cap. That's what the bill says. The House case allows us to be involved in third party. So if that bill stands, then I think there would have to be an adjustment to the revenue share cap. We would have to start a process to try to renegotiate that piece of it. And there's conversations around that right now, but I think we have to get through this federal bill process first. And then it goes back a little bit to Steve's question. Is that indexed to Ohio State's numbers? Because right now the revenue share cap is indexed to the Autonomy 4, and including the Pac-12 still has some remnants in there in the equation. Ticket sales, sponsorship, licensing, TV distribution, college football playoff, it's averaged out over the Autonomy 4 conferences, and then it's 22%. If we took 22% of those categories at Ohio State, that number is a lot bigger than 21 million. So is there a process where the index changes? So I think if you put out a hard number, I think that challenges and complicates everything. But if it's indexed to a certain percentage, then I think that's a better formula. And hopefully those are things that we can continue to look at.
Do you see in the future at all potentially the rising cost of having to pay for student athletes having an effect on coach compensation? Would coach compensation have to come down for the player number to keep going up?
I think it's all situational. That hasn't happened yet, right, in the marketplace, even though, again, the last 4 years we've had really NIL at a high level. You haven't seen that impacted. So maybe in another cycle, maybe in new hires, but that has not been the case. The market has not reacted to that. And look, we're on the leading edge from an assistant salary pool standpoint. We have the highest salary pool in college football, right? And so because we want to have the right guys who can develop, the right coaches who can develop these young men and get them to that next level. So we have leaned in on having the right people. So you haven't seen that impacted yet. Does that happen in a cycle? Does that happen in a reset at some point? Maybe, but I haven't seen that yet.
Could we get to a point where your rev share is 22% of your revenue, not the average revenue, or would that never work?
Again, federal, codified, legally defensible structure is what we're all after. If there's a way to codify that, if there's a way to allow us again to invest as we see fit, to me that's preferable to us, but there needs to be certainty, right? There needs to be certainty around what that is. If it's just a race every year where we really can't control it and it's dictated truly by the market and there's no visibility on what the true market is, that's not a good system to live in. So we would want a system where we have certainty, where Ohio State continues to exercise its value, whatever that looks like. That's a model that we would support.
Just a real quick question. You mentioned like schools like Michigan contributing to the athletic, it's always been a self-funded athletic program. I'm assuming that's going to stay the same?
Correct. Yep. Yeah, we're self-sustaining. And that's, again, back to the $500 million, that's the pursuit, is we have to grow.
In some ways, college sports, college football is going to be healthy, right? Ratings are great, games are great. But I hear all the time, I'm sure you do and everyone else, there are a lot of people who are just kind of like throwing up their hands about fanciful NIL chaos.
Mhm.
Like, this is not sustainable, I'm losing interest because the players I used were a freshman, are gone as a sophomore, I don't know these guys, it's all about money. I mean, look, I'm not naive, college sports always different.
Yeah.
Are you concerned with Ohio State, the feeling among people like you, that this is on the verge of getting out of control, and we have to rein this in so that people will still care the way they always care?
Yeah. I think it goes back to what I mentioned about the three things that I know are not going to change. And if we keep those three things in place, the business aspects, if we communicate and we're transparent about those business aspects, again, people may not like it, but at least they understand it. Those are the kind of things that I think about, is how do we maintain our purpose? Again, education's not going away. We can talk about the money, and we're embracing all of that, but that piece is not going to go away. And then we're still going to have football Saturdays. We're still going to play soccer games and hockey games and all of those things. Those pieces are not going to go away. But it goes back to what we've been talking about, is I think if we have clarity on what the model is, and it's legally defendable, so we're not getting sued all the time, then I think people will say, okay, I can decide to embrace this and like it, or, hey, that's not what I grew up with, and I may move on. But the lack of clarity, I think that's what, the people I talk to, that's what they're frustrated about. But you know what? They're still a Buckeye, and they still want to watch us play. They still want to watch us win. They want to know what they can do to help. So to me, the clarity of the structure has to get there before that would happen. But it's really fascinating. Given all these challenges, ratings are up, viewership is up. I just went through all of our data with all of our revenues. People, they still care, but we can't lose that.
And what is your level of confidence that a bill will become law that is palatable to you and to most Congress?
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I think the question first is, will it even pass, the Senate, the next round? And we don't know the answer to that. So I think the answer to that question for me is, what do the next couple weeks look like? What does the next 6 weeks look like? Can we make some impact on some of these changes? I do believe that we can. And I think there are certain things that I don't think are too complicated, that if we get these things done, I could see us supporting a bill. But right now, in the current form, there's just too many open-ended questions. And that's why we've been communicating directly with, this is what we would like to see, these are some changes, these are some recommendations. Hey, present a compromise back to us. We haven't really seen that yet. So those are the kind of things that we're going through. So I think the next 3 to 6 weeks will tell exactly what it is. Okay. Thanks all. Yep.